So ladies and gentlemen, please make a group round of applause.
Hey, can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining for this panel. My name, and a quick introduction on my side, my name is Augie Llag. I'm a partner and head of Asia at CMT Digital. We are a 26-year-old trading and investment firm based out of the US. We've been investing broadly in the space for about 6 years. We've raised 3 funds, and we partnered with over 100 companies in the space. I am, as I mentioned, a partner and head of Asia, which means I spend most of my time in this part of the world. And it is my pleasure to be moderating this panel on building tomorrow's backbone, the rise of a decentralized infrastructure, along with our esteemed panelists, Wang from Analog and Hilmar from Gelato. Before we jump into it, guys, maybe you want to give a brief introduction on both yourselves and a couple minutes on your project for those in the audience who are perhaps less familiar.
For sure. Hey everyone. Thanks for having me here. So Gelato, we call ourselves Web3's decentralized backend, and what we do is we provide Web3 services to over 400 projects in the space to help them augment some of the limitations of today's EVM-based blockchains. These include we provide smart contract automation services. We help projects abstract away the complexity of dealing and sending transactions to blockchains to their customers using account abstraction services. And then also we help them leverage off-chain computation and data to augment the capabilities of what their smart contracts can do. So you can think of us as kind of like a decentralized network of nodes that help you supercharge and create superpowers to your smart contracts. And yeah, our customers include projects from DeFi, NFTs, gaming, and many others.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric, and I live in one of the greatest cities in the world, which is Seoul. And I'm working on a project called Analog. So at Analog, we build cross-chain messaging services. So essentially, what we do is we connect different smart contracts and different applications on different chains together. And we've been building for about a year and a half now, raised about 14 mil. And since then, we've basically been heads down trying to build out a few products. The first product that we're launching is called Analog Watch. It's essentially like the graph but cross-chain. So it allows you to query data from any chain that you want into your own dApp front end or into your own set of smart contracts. So it basically allows you to do cross-chain query as well as cross-chain write. The other product that we're launching is called what we call the Omnichain SDK. So essentially it takes separate smart contracts and connects them together. And that way you could essentially take your smart contracts and build omni-chain apps that connect your liquidity or user base or whatnot from different chains and unite them together.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Both of those are very cool. So let's get into it, guys. I think the agenda for today, infrastructure is obviously a very meaty topic. I think what we'll hope to do today is 2 things. One, we'll double click on some of the more topical areas within decentralized infrastructure today, namely sequencers, app chains, layer 2s. And we'll also maybe ask a few project-specific questions based on some of the challenges and focus areas that you guys are dealing with. But before that, let's start with the basics, right? And maybe understand better the problem statement. Why is decentralization at the infrastructure layer important? Eric, maybe you want to kick us off.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with exactly what the product that you're building is promising. So when people generally build blockchain-based products, their user base tends to desire some level of decentralization when they use it because that's one of the biggest value adds to those products. So when developers are launching those products, then people desire, for example, the validator set to be decentralized. Well, they desire, for example, the set of nodes to be decentralized. They desire, for example, when you get data, that should be decentralized, right? And all of those things are just, it's kind of like a tacit agreement in a sense between what you sell your product as and what the user wants. So if you're building like a layer 1 or a layer 2, generally speaking, you have to have many more decentralized components. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that all blockchain-based products necessarily need to be decentralized. So for example, a lot of people use the wormhole bridge. The wormhole bridge is a bridge with only 19 validators, if I remember correctly. And the people who use that, they read about wormhole, and they're generally well familiar that these set of validators are pre-chosen from a selected group. And if they're okay with that, then I think they're fine to proceed. However, I think for most users, they desire something a little bit more that follows the decentralization ethos, that can't be censored, that can't really be taken down when certain people collude, and that's why like building decentralized infrastructure is very important.
Yeah, fully agree. I think for me, let's just start to define Web3 infrastructure for starters. So there are like different layers here, right? So you have the block builder sort of execution layer at the very bottom, which is, hey, how do we order and sequence transactions on chain? Where are the transactions stored? How do we get access to the data of these transactions to applications, right? There you have like validators, you got RPC providers, for example, right? Then you have another layer on top which helps read or index that data to make it easier to sort of consume, right? This is where like indexers come in. Then you have services like oracles or automation services like Gelato, which help you actually send transactions from off-chain to on-chain with data that can be originated from on-chain or off-chain. And then you have, for example, relayers, and relayers are basically like services that actually help you write to blockchains and send and transport data from other services to chains. And then you have like stuff like cross-chain messaging protocols, which are kind of combinations a bit. I see them as combinations of oracles and relayers. And so where decentralization matters varies a lot of what sort of services you talk about. And for me, the cool thing about Web3 is building hyperstructures. So you can build protocols and applications that are not controlled by anyone, that just fulfill a certain process like a swap, a lending protocol or whatnot, but minimize the value extraction that they actually take as a fee. And if they need to run like autonomously, not controlled by anyone. They need to have censorship resistance. They shouldn't have single point of failure, right? And they should be reliable in terms of they shouldn't be one party that goes down and then it stops working, right? And so this is why I think decentralized, these are the reasons why we have decentralized infrastructure that enable things like hyperstructures, and where decentralization matters varies a lot based on which part of the stack you actually talk about.
Maybe just one quick follow-up there for you both. I mean, are there any parts of this stack that you finished describing, Hilmar, that you feel need to be centralized, either temporarily or indefinitely? I don't know. The devil's advocate point of view could be that centralization, even on a temporary basis, is a good stepping stone to decentralization, and maybe decentralization needs to wait for incentives to be put in place or other such things. Not sure if either of you have a view on this.
Yeah, I can maybe start. So centralization is great, right? So centralization, like we are not in here to decentralize. Decentralization is not a goal. It's not a means to an end, right? We are here to make something censorship resistant. We are here to make something highly reliable and available. But we are not here to just make it decentralized for the purpose of decentralization, right? It's not an end goal. So sometimes centralization is great, and sometimes things should be centralized. So I'm a big fan of, if you need performance and scalability as the most important attribute of a certain service, then you should just be highly centralized. For example, my humble opinion is that indexers should be super centralized. Like, I don't see a big reason of having not available on chain, right? There's a lot of benefit of actually having decentralized data, but like if you just read it off chain, then you can just choose from multiple providers. If one starts lying to you, just switch easily over to another one, right? So I think this is not really a real benefit. You gain benefit of decentralization if you have like censorship resistance and reliability and these kind of things. And another thing that I think is very hard, that should be decentralized, it's very hard to decentralize, is everything that has subjectivity involved and non-deterministic behavior. So data from APIs, for example, right? If you want the CoinGecko price on chain, then guess what? You have to trust CoinGecko because it's the entity that provides you with the data, right? Or some other API provider. So there, because it's non-deterministic, it's also very difficult to decentralize. And there we have to just live with some trade-offs.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there. So before I did this job at Analog, I worked as the head of growth at Parity. And at Parity, we basically helped a lot of blockchains or layer ones on board into the Polkadot ecosystem. And what I've discovered from my experience there is that a lot of chains struggle really hard to kind of get to that point of decentralization. And basically, after Bitcoin and Ethereum, and not just within the Polkadot ecosystem, basically any layer 1 or layer 2, to some extent, started off with some large degree of centralization. So, for example, when Polkadot first launched, they launched with essentially POA for a few months before they were able to upgrade the chain and change into some sort of POS consensus mechanism. And I think to a large part, as blockchains and these ecosystems and infrastructure becomes more complex, it gets harder and harder to decentralize on day one. And that's why many of these infrastructure builders make an initial decision to become more centralized at the beginning. However, there's a few caveats that they need to follow. So basically, they essentially need to have like a really good roadmap to that point of decentralization. And also the points, like the kind of value adds that they bring initially has to be like strong enough so that even the components that are centralized are kind of forgivable in a sense by the audience. So for example, like for layer twos have centralized sequencers right now. And for centralized sequencers, they are not able to fully censor a transaction because when people actually don't get their transaction included by the sequencer, they're able to post it to layer 1 still for the most part. So, however, in the long run, they're like these users are going to be very dependent on one entity to kind of do their bidding, essentially, or do what they want to do. So, in that perspective, then, as these ecosystems mature more and more, they're going to have to kind of decrease that level of centralization as long as the users and they have some sort of tacit agreement on what that process looks like.
Makes sense. And I definitely want to loop back to sequencers perhaps a little bit later in the conversation. But switching gears, maybe I can ask a couple of specific questions, project-specific questions to each of you. Hilmar, maybe we'll start with yourself and Gelato. I think as you described, right, Gelato is very much a well-known and well-loved tool amongst the developer and DAO community. But I would say the fundamental premise of leveraging a network of nodes to automate smart contract execution, et cetera, has a much wider applicability with a much larger user base versus today, I think is a fair statement. And so I guess the question for you is, what types of users do you see using your backend today? How do you see that customer persona developing over the next few years? And what needs to be built from an infrastructure perspective in order to service that new segment?
Yeah, so we see the EVM as kind of like a new serverless platform that is decentralized and has certain capabilities, mostly consensus and trust that traditional serverless environments don't offer. And what Gelato does, sort of very technically, is we help augment the limitations of these EVM blockchains for projects that still want to retain the properties of censorship resistance and reliability, but want to build applications on, let's say, Ethereum or something, right? And that are powerful and actually have a lot of the capabilities that normal smart contracts don't have. And most of our user base is still, I would say, DeFi. For example, like the MakerDAOs of the world, the PancakeSwaps of the world, right? The Beefy Finances of the world, everywhere where you have recurring, conditional, event-driven processes happen that need to be executed with certain data. There is where Gelato basically comes in. So all the non-user specific transactions that have to be sent, all the operational things in the background, all the plumbing, right? This is basically done here by Gelato in this case, for example. But not only that, like we expanded from automation also into gasless transactions and helping projects improve the UX of their applications. For example, Zora, the NFT marketplace, uses us for gasless transactions. Or cross-chain messaging protocols, actually like Connext, they rely on our infrastructure to get transactions included on 14 different EVM chains because we have a broad sort of spectrum. So we are also servicing NFT platforms and infrastructure, protocols, also social and gaming, usually from the UX perspectives, but they are very, very Web3 native, I would say. Our audience is very Web3 native, but what is, I think, something which I find very bullish about the current sort of sentiment that we are in right now in the market, is we are in the bear market, but I'm talking like for the first time actually in the history of Gelato, we are talking to like NASDAQ companies that come into our Discord and want to integrate our technologies to build their own Web3 products, right? So and we are not talking about like 2 developers anymore that are just building up a new token or like a project. We are talking about like developers from like publicly listed companies that come in and want to leverage these tools to build applications. So I think we are seeing more and more a shift and focus to talking to enterprises, actually. So big companies that want to leverage Web3 and the tools. So I think there we need to, just as an industry, make a shift from assuming our customers and projects that integrate us as like infrastructure services are these degens, are these Web3 people that know all the quirks. They are now enterprise B2B developers that are very well aware of Web3 and they know all the ins and outs, so they're very well educated, but their audience is a completely different one. Their audience is a Web2 industry, a Web2 sort of customer base. So I think this is a large shift that is happening right now for us internally. And yeah, we still have to work to make all the communication material and everything sort of tailored to that. But that makes me actually very bullish because we are seeing that transition right now.
I have a question for you. You mentioned Maker just now, and as we may know, Maker is making a on-chain proposal, well, not on-chain, a proposal right now to switch to a Solana-based fork and run their operations there. What do you think about that, and how are you going to support them, or are you planning on supporting them if they make that switch?
That's a very, very good question. So there is a movement, and we are seeing it very clearly. There's a movement to app chains. There's a movement for protocols and projects and applications to move to their own execution environment that is not Ethereum, but is entangled and connected to Ethereum in terms of liquidity and minimizing their trust. But why do they want to do it? Okay, they can get transaction fees down, right? But they can also have more control over the UX and how users interact with it, and all these services that, for example, also we help augment on like these public available blockchains. They want to access these services in a more sort of cohesive and inherent manner on their blockchains. And I'm talking about transaction lifecycle management. So before this transaction get included, run this logic. After this transaction is included, run that logic, right? So basically supercharged EVM powers, what we kind of like try to do. And that's actually a big movement I'm seeing, and that's why we are also positioning ourselves and very soon, actually, I think in Token 2049 we have an announcement in that regard as more in the L2 roll-up world. And I think I see these projects moving to their own app chains, and there we want them to be able to leverage Gelato services much more tightly integrated than they can today on like an Ethereum, where it's just like a module that is added on top. But to answer your question, I see a lot of projects actually doing something similar, not talking Solana. I think I'm not 100% convinced that that's the right move. But if you need low latency distributed systems like PIF does, they also forked Solana, then Solana code base is a really, really good one. So it's just quite an overhead, I would say.
That's actually probably a very nice segue into maybe the last part of our discussion, which is let's talk about, for the lack of a better phrase, some of the battles that are raging at the infrastructure layer. Maybe we start exactly with this topic, which is modular, or rather monolithic blockchains versus app chains or sovereign chains, right? As you described, Hilmar, I think there are natural trade-offs that developers have to think about in terms of how much control they want to exude over their user experience versus the monumental challenge that exists if you choose an app chain when it comes to bootstrapping your own security, ecosystem, etc. And so I guess the question for you both would be, any perspectives? If you're a developer thinking about which choice to make, any perspectives on how to think about these alternatives? And to your point made earlier, what tooling still needs to be built to make the app chain path easier?
Yeah, so I think this is a conversation I've had with quite a few teams, basically helping them make that sort of decision. Okay, so whether do I build on Ethereum, do I build on Solana, or do I build my own chain? I think for the great majority of builders, they don't really need to build their own chain because generally speaking, it takes quite a long time and effort to build up the proper infrastructure or be able to use the proper infrastructure, learn Rust, learn Go or whatever that's needed to actually kind of get that entire app chain running properly, as well as be able to make that app chain interact with other ecosystems. So for the set of users that should build their own chain, I think those are generally users who have already like a huge community So for example, like if Maker, for example, wants to fork off of Ethereum mainnet or whatnot and build their own app chain, I think that could potentially be an interesting decision because they already have a large set of users that support them. And Frax as well is building a Frax chain as well because they have a large set of users supporting their stablecoin, and they want to kind of build their own DeFi community off of that. The other set of users where it makes sense to kind of build an app chain is basically somebody who is not satisfied with kind of this one-size-fits-all idea of being entrapped by something like EVM or another smart contracting language, because there are inherent limitations essentially of programming and building applications in those languages. So generally speaking, if you're building an app chain, you could build on the runtime level, and then you could basically use some sort of modular stack, let's say, and then combine, let's say there's some DeFi modules that you want to put in, or there's some NFT modules that you want to put in, some bridge modules, right? And then so you can combine the right kind of tooling needed to kind of make your blockchain as performant as possible for your particular application. But however, that's only a small subset of potential users there.
I want to disagree here with this statement and maybe have a more spicy take than this. So I think actually we will soon come to a point where it's not even a question about hey, should I launch my app chain or not? It will just be an app chain by default. It will just be, and it won't be hey, I need to run my own Cosmos-based chain and I need to spin up validators or whatnot. It's just, I will go to this dashboard, I will click this button, my app chain is there in a second, it's up and running, I just get an RPC, I deploy my smart contract, all the services that I need, that I explained back then when I sort of talked about the stack, are available to me by default, and I have full control over the execution environment, what should happen in the transaction lifecycle, how the UX should be handled, if users should be paying fees, how do users identify themselves, and so on. So I think they are being, there's a huge progress right now in the space. We are personally also working on exactly this, and I believe that it's still early, obviously, right? And we still only see a handful, the first networks launching like Base, Zora. There are, I think, we are talking to 20 other chains that are basically in the process of transitioning to the app chain, and they're not only huge chains, huge applications, but I think it will be the default very soon, actually. And then the discussion about which chain I should launch on stuff is over. It's just you are your own chain. You might be a sovereign chain, or you might be more entangled into Ethereum. And then the question is just, okay, what is missing? Yeah, what are the trade-offs of your own chain, right? That's basically what is missing. The infrastructure is there. You just need to sort of get it over. You just need to migrate it. You need to have a platform that makes it available to you. But the question is, okay, you lose atomic composability. What is atomic composability? It's basically flash loaning from Aave, going leverage on Maker, swapping on Uniswap and going back, right? This is without shared sequencing. It's very difficult to achieve, right? But the whole internet is asynchronous, right? You make a request to another server, you wait, the message comes back. So the whole internet was built with this premise in mind, and I think actually not many applications need this atomic composability, and you can have a lot of cool user experiences without that, with all the other benefits you have, like scalability, no fees, great UX, and identity. So that's why I'm more bullish on this.
Makes sense. The other, more contentious area that I'd love to get your guys' opinion on that, Eric alluded to a little bit earlier in the conversation is sequencers and to what extent they should be decentralized. And maybe for the audience's broader context, to the extent you're not familiar, layer twos are really coming into their own. TPS on layer twos in the Ethereum ecosystem has surpassed Ethereum main chain, and sequencers play a key role when it comes to broader data availability and transaction ordering, basically, sending the state back to layer one. And so the question is a little bit, and the debate raging among some friend groups, not my friend groups, but some, is to what extent these should be decentralized, right? Should it be something purely decentralized, almost to the point where it's permissionless? Or should sequencers be managed and overseen by a centralized entity, let's say Coinbase, or something in the middle? Curious to get your guys' take.
Yeah, I personally think that sequencers should be decentralized. And there's really two ways to, in a sense, decentralize that. So the first way is essentially with a shared sequencer. So essentially, how that works is all these layer 2s, they share a common set of, you could say, validators in that sequencer set. And then there's a defined kind of rule set to join that sequencer validator set. And that way, basically, you can kind of trust in a sense that all of these layer 2s are treated in a, you could say the transactions are ordered and treated in a certain way when it comes to kind of submitting it to the Ethereum layer 1 chain. And the other one would, of course, be like a decentralized set of sequencers, but within the, I guess, within each layer 2 itself, they have like their own set of validators. I think most likely they will kind of, most likely initially it will kind of be this like private set of sequencers like by each layer 2 because different layer 2s have their different, I guess, business agendas and such. But either way, one of these kind of futures should probably be realized soon because there's a lot of debate right now. There's a lot of kind of concern about if you're like a user on Optimism or Arbitrum or whatnot, whether my transaction will be like MEV'd, but basically by the people who actually run the sequencer. So the centralized entity who runs the sequencer will be able to see every transaction in the mempool, and they'll be able to order it the way they desire. And if that entity ever gets hijacked or misbehaves, then they'll be able to kind of maximize that MEV and basically trade against the own users who are working at that layer 2, which makes it like very difficult essentially to, in the long run, kind of operate a centralized sequencer. Yeah.
So I disagree. I think most sequencers should be centralized and will be centralized. Why? The reason why we are doing L2s is so we can finally scale. Decentralization always introduces latency, and we want to have low latent, high scalable, cheap ecosystems where the chains, where the execution that happens is trustless, using validity proofs, for example, with ZK rollups, right, where we don't have to trust the integrity of the rollup of the sequencer operator, but we can enjoy the centralized scalability, right? And obviously, if you use Ethereum as a data availability layer, you have a full overview of like the sequencing and the ordering. And if a sequencer starts MEVing, right, then you leave the chain, right? Then you go to a chain of an operator that doesn't MEV you in the to the extent that the centralized sequencer does. So I think we will see a world of most of these, especially enterprises, like enterprises won't share sequencers, right? Enterprises will be, this is my sequencer, it complies with the KYC AML regulations of South Korea. Only individuals that are registered here can actually interact with it and not anyone else. And they will interoperate maybe with a few other local sequencers, right? And maybe you have like small shared sequencers in that area, but otherwise we will have these DeFi ecosystems that we have before, where have like maybe layer 2s like Arbitrum, Optimism, where multiple applications are there and they can be potentially more decentralized, but I think the majority of them will actually be centralized because they can, and it's cool, and it's still trustless.
There you have it, two sides of the spectrum, and with that, I think we're just out of time. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, Hilmar and Eric, for participating and for sharing your views.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, a big round of applause for our moderator and our two guest speakers.